I've worked with some ISPs that, they believe that bringing in an AIOps software tool, going to magically all of a sudden start doing things that they didn't have in their core discipline already, if you will, of managing the network. So it isn't going to fix those things. Like I can tell you from real life experience, folks out there, I think they can layer on an application of AIOps and all of a sudden it's going to start doing some things.
My name is Dave Siegel. I have just started this new venture with NetMavens and rebranding my consulting company, trying to bring in folks like Mike and a bunch of other experienced consultants to go out there and help small to medium-sized carriers as well as ISPs with all manner of things related to their network, whether it's improving the reliability, building automation, building the foundation for things like AIOps. We're all here to help build and scale those networks and make your network more mature. I think Mike Hoyt needs no introduction, but I'll introduce him anyway. Mike and I have known each other for a super scary long time. I think at least 20 years. How much more than that, I'm not going to say, but super long time. Mike and I worked together at Frontier Global Center and then Global Crossing and then Level 3. And Mike has many years as an engineering leader. And we both have a fair bit of experience with AIOps. So with that, let's kick it off here. Again, for those of you that have just joined, I see that we do have a few other folks join. Actually, let's let each one of you introduce yourselves that are in the audience here just by letting us know where you're calling in from today. Phoenix, Arizona, Greg Freeman, awesome. Guy, Arizona, Guy Tal. Friends are joining.
Leonardo, hey Leonardo, Gaston.
Mark from Las Vegas, that'd be Mark Littig. Welcome, Mark. John Mueller from Rochester, awesome.
Been a while, John. For me.
Again, if you're just joining, you should see if you're calling in from a browser, something that says Start Live Chat in the bottom of the screen. If you click that and put in your name and question, you can actually join in on the audio and ask your question live or just participate in the conversation. Mike and I welcome you to do that. So I chose 5 things that I think are important for kicking off a successful AIOps program. There's obviously a lot of things to think about. And when Mike and I were collaborating on this, I think we came up with like 15 things that were important, not just before you get started, but for the whole program to see success all the way through implementation and execution and so on and so forth. But I've picked what I think are 5 really important things. And the first one is success criteria. And Greg Freeman, don't be mad at me because, I did kind of steal this whole elephant, taking a bite of the elephant one at a time from the webinar that you and I did together for Selector last year on a very similar topic to this. But I have seen this across a bunch of different deployments where trying to do too much with your AIOps implementation is the surest way to make sure that if it doesn't fail, it goes a lot slower than you'd like it to. I've personally made the mistake where, try and think that AIOps is like this magic thing where when you just feed all this stuff into it, that you magically get these insights out of it, that it just sort of figures out all the needles in the haystack and how they're all related. And nothing is further from the truth. That there's nothing magic about AI at all. AI, particularly when it's applied to operations, is really just a suite of tools that you apply to different kinds of data sets to help you get insights out of it, but it doesn't just magically do anything. And in fact, there's a lot we can do to sabotage that. One way to stop from sabotaging yourself is just to, when you're starting out, pick one use case, one thing, work with your operations partners and identify one thing that they are going to get some value out of. It helps to have a very narrow data set and, be as specific as possible when you're trying to figure out what that is. Mike, what do you want to pitch in here? Been your experience?
Exactly that, Dave. I mean, I've worked with some ISPs that, they believe that bringing in an AIOps software tool was, going to magically all of a sudden start doing things that they didn't have in their core discipline already, if you will, of managing the network. So it isn't going to fix those things. Like Dave said, we all, a lot of us on here call know that, but there are, I can tell you from real life experience, folks out there that think they can layer on an application of AI ops and all of a sudden it's going to start doing some things. Sure, it would, but the underlying thing, problem is that if you don't have all that, that underlying infrastructure in place, data, et cetera, it doesn't matter what you buy and what you spend and et cetera, and what you try to do, you're automatically, I like to use the analogy of, you're building a house on a foundation that's not solid. So, you've got to have your foundation solid. And it really comes down to, picking something that you can actually show some success, to your point, Dave, but it's something that's going to solve a problem, right? We talk about it later. It has an immediate return on investment, right? Whether that's reduction in whatever it is, like tickets or, there's hundreds of things, obviously. But yeah, I would agree. You got to pick something. And when you don't, and you have 3 or 4 things that you're trying to solve, or you start with one and then we see this a lot, it morphs, right? You start with one and then it all of a sudden becomes, oh, let's do this too. And let's do this too, which is great for later on in that incremental. We'll talk about it later, but that scope creep is horrible as well. And that's why it's so important to use that simple, get that easy win, use that simple business case to start to show the wins. But it isn't a magic, wand that's going to come in and do a lot of things. I agree with you.
So Mike, can you think of any examples of a, say, an easy use case that's maybe a good place to start, kind of kick things off?
Yeah, I mean, one of the easiest ones that I encountered was an ISP with a transport network. And I think, like when you look at folks and they have a network, and one of the things that you might have, and now everybody on this call knows, we've all said it to each other probably many times, the swivel chairing of this system over to this system over to this system to try to correlate some events. That to me was one of the easier wins that you could have, is be able to go in and quickly say, okay, I want to reduce the number of swivel chairs that I'm trying to have. So I'm going to have, I'll use the AI ops layer, if you will, or software to aggregate all that into one place with, again, eventually trying to get rid of those systems long term. But the immediate one would be, hey, I want to stop swivel chairing to 3 systems and I want to go to 1. And I want that one system to, to basically, consolidate and, aggregate all that information. Those were some easy wins, that I saw. Ticket duplication is another one. That's a great win. If you're already doing tickets and you want to run that through to see what, where you have multiple tickets across many parts of your network, maybe you have a voice ticket, maybe you have an IP ticket, maybe you have a transport ticket. That's another one that I think is a huge win too.
I think that one's very easy, Mike. I got to disagree with you on that.
Yeah, not easy. Sorry. Yeah.
I think Igor's going to agree with that one too, because he's spent, oh gosh, how long have you spent working on ticket deduplication with the AI ops vendor deployed at your company, Igor? Almost a year, right? It's a lot harder than it sounds. I would say don't start with ticket deduplication. Yes, alarm suppression I think is good. You can get some basic wins, but there might be some other things that are easier. I know that one deployment that I've seen, they had kind of more of an enterprise type of network where they had a pair of routers at each site, and each site had dual MPLS providers, MPLS VPN providers, and they basically did do some deduplication in that they were just correlating interface up down with interface protocol with maybe BFD as well, and then they integrated config changes, and that kind of let them see the whole network, let them see the health of the whole network.
Yeah.
And then if there was a change, they could see if there's a change in health of a particular site, they could see if there were any config changes that were made by any of their engineers on their devices when that happened. So that was a fairly easy case to build, because it was only really looking at like 4 things. But it was trying to answer a very basic question, which is, is the network healthy, and could it have been caused by one of our engineers?
Yeah. No, so I guess counterpoint to that, Dave, was and we're going to talk about it later, and I guess I'll, dovetail into that point. My other point was around everybody's journey is different. Everybody's journey starts somewhere different, in my opinion, right? Some of them will be the same, but you might have, I mean, again, I'll contrast some folks on this call that I know, they may be already doing a lot of data aggregation, data, they might meta tagging, all this stuff, right? They may have all of that and they're doing all that. Their journey may start with, hey, I need less tickets, right? I'm not saying it's going to be easier, but that may be their first easy win because they don't need the AIOps software to do other things, like where there might be another ISP where they need AIOps just to help them, with getting config standards standardized across their network or event management or something like that. I'm just saying everybody's journey is different. So what may be simple use case for one is not a simple use case for another and vice versa, right? And
Yeah.
and that's how I think you have to go in and approach it. And yeah, I mean, if you're a company that doesn't have a lot of metadata, you don't have a Big Panda or a Kafka, or you don't have a lot of metadata and you have all these things, there's other things you can do with AIOps that you should focus on immediately before you start looking at that.
I think that's right. You got to start with your, what are your pain points? What pain points does operation have? And don't necessarily start with the biggest pain point. Find a pain point for sure, but maybe not the biggest one, because the biggest one might be one of the hardest ones to solve. If it has a fairly easy implementation approach, then great, but don't get hung up on that. So, and then once you get that first win, you get that easy use case, you're able to show that the system is working, that it's providing some value, no matter how small, then you're in a good position where you can start building on it. And you pick the next use case and start to build. You're building a foundation and you're building success as you go, which is going to really help for making your executive sponsor happy that the product has provided some value so quickly, and it's gonna make you look great because you're constantly showing wins as you go along, which is going to be really important for adoption, for ensuring you continue to have budget, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Let's talk about data next. Sounds easy, right? Like, of course, the system needs data. Of course, you have to feed it things, but it's surprising how many people get stuck here. How they get hung up on this.
Yeah.
If you're gonna introduce a new vendor and you're just gonna have them access the network directly, right? If you're gonna configure traps to go directly to that system, syslogs, and that system can have access to do SNMP queries, then great. But a lot of networks, especially when they get to scale, when they have larger devices that have much larger configs, having too many people pounding SNMP on a router is not a good thing. So you're going to need a data architecture, and sometimes your security group gets super involved in that. So now we got a comment from Greg.
Yeah.
He was just agreeing with the previous point. Biggest pain point might be larger level of effort. Quick wins, build momentum, and give the team something to celebrate. Absolutely.
And can we just on that point real quick, if we go back real quick on that, Dave, because I just want to make one point on that, is that like what Guy had mentioned, and I mean, it's really critical on scope creep too, because again, just going back to defining success, and I've seen this too, where, you get 3/4, and Greg, I know, has seen this and others, you get 3/4 through and you're successful, and all of a sudden you start trying to get to the next one, but you haven't finished the first one. You're close, but you get 80%. So then you end up with again, it's really clear it's really important on that scope creep, in my opinion, to make sure that, regarding defining success, it's number one killer that I've seen for these projects, top two at least. So anyways, sorry. Great point, Greg. And I agree 100% with that.
Yep. Let's go back to data architecture real quick. So how many of you have a really easy to use data architecture for feeding stats to a new vendor like Kafka or something similar, a bus where you can, maybe you're just using Telegraph and you can just add another exporter or something along those lines. How many people have that in their company? Show hands. in chat. We got one, somewhat. Have Kafka feeds. Yeah. I could say like Kafka sounds super easy, but when the first time I went to implement Kafka, I discovered that it takes a lot of configuration. Otherwise, it's not passing along even basic metadata like, hey, here's the device that sent this message, right? So you actually make your problem worse if Kafka is not set up right. But that can be a great way to get things like syslogs easily distributed to a lot of different places, is to have some kind of a Kafka overlay there. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. I think Mike and I predicted that this one might be where we spend the most time talking about metadata, and this is really about data classification. Mike, why do we think we're going to spend so much time on this today?
Well, for everyone on the call that knows me, knows that I'm this is a big thing for me. I'm huge on standards and making sure and again, we can go to, this is going to be around where do you keep your information? What is the source of truth, right? All of these things that we've all talked for years, like where does the data come from? Is it good? What's there? Is it good enough? How many interfaces do you have data stored in, right? Do you have CMDB? Do you have Netbox? Et cetera, et cetera. So, but as far as the metadata, I'm of the opinion that your network is the truth, is your truth source. And that's why you should be, as descriptive as you can when you're describing your devices, your interfaces, et cetera. And you should put as much data as you possibly can, and not too much, but enough to make it so a human can read it. And again, it's the foundation. I go to that, like everything you're going to do. You made a great example, Dave, and I'll just key off that example that you used. If Kafka sent me something and maybe it didn't know the router name, but I had a good metadata and all my interfaces that are facing, and let's say I'm in Buenos Aires and I'm connected to Sao Paulo, at least if I saw that interface information, that description come across, right, I could at least kind of surmise that, hey, everything I'm seeing is saying Sao Paulo or places around Buenos Aires. But that's what good interface descriptions, or any description on a device, does for you, is it allows you to have all those, you can tag it by the country, all the different things that you can do. And then, there's the other camp that believe, and I'm in the camp that I believe the network is the source. You put the information on the routers, devices, et cetera. But there is a camp that we talked about, Dave, where you could just put in an arbitrary meta tag, right, for an interface, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then you dip to something else to go figure out what 1, 2, 5, 6. And some people are using that approach, and I've seen it. I don't personally agree with it, but that's why it's so important. All of that data, this data that comes here is, again, just the ultimate critical. It's number one around how well you're going to be able to operate your network. And again, good operators are operators that, have already do this today, right? The ones that struggle are the ones that don't understand that today, even without AIOps, you can't run a network unless that data is, very, very standard. It's got, it's compliance, there's compliance standards, things like that. And that's why, to me, I think this is probably my opinion, the largest topic around AIOps and how to adopt it. If you don't have a handle on this piece, you're never going to get anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, let's explain how this correlation works, right? So I'm gonna steal an example of how Selector does it, because Nitin Kumar, the CTO over at Selector, explained this so well at a networking field day a couple years ago. Like the idea that they got was actually based on like Spotify and Netflix, right? So, Netflix and Spotify, they figure out, they have a recommendation engine that says, based on things that you've liked, here's the next movie you should watch, or here's the next song you should listen to. And the way that it does that is it takes every piece of content and it breaks it down into, thousands of different components. But somebody has decided what that component is, right? They've tagged that movie with 1,000 different pieces of metadata or tags. And the tag will say oh, it's a romance. Oh, it has these actors in it. Oh, it has this producer, this director, and it uses all of this to tag this piece of content. And then other things that share a larger number of tags, you are more likely to like. And it's exactly the same with basically the correlation engine is nothing more than a recommendation engine. It's built with the same kind of fundamental logic so that if two events come in and they share 15 tags with each other, they're more likely to be correlated than two other events that only have 2 tags in common at that same time. And that's it. The only way to derive those tags and put that tag on the data is from metadata. So, the interface description it's probably the most convenient place to get metadata because almost everyone overloads the interface description with a whole bunch of metadata. But it's not the only way to solve that problem. You can get it from Netbox or Nautobot or ServiceNow or, even I've even heard of people using Salesforce, the CMDB in Salesforce.
Yeah.
Theoretically, the CMDB in Jira could do something like that, but something that's a little more built for an actual IP network is probably best.
Yeah.
CRMs can come in handy to actually have, if you're able to capture a customer ID on an interface, you could pull in other information from the CRM about that customer that could also be used to tag that particular event, which could come in handy. But that's why it's so important. Show of hands here. How many of you have a great inventory system that you can rely on to give you accurate information about your devices and your interfaces on the network and have all that critical metadata? I'm not surprised. Well, actually, Greg, I am a little surprised. Don't you have like 10 CMDBs? Or I might be underestimating that number. I remember from our conversation last year, Greg, and by the way, if you want to like jump in live and have a live chat on voice and video, that'd be awesome too. But if I remember from our conversation last year, because you had so many disparate CMDBs, the interface description was the one thing that let you progress your project forward. Okay, you centralized everything into an ops DB.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's a huge project. So what else you want to say about interface descriptions, Mike?
I mean, I'd ask the same question. I mean, I've seen this growing. I've seen it at some ISPs, and I'm just wondering what you guys have seen. I mean, a lot of you that know me know that I was always a proponent, and I have a 30-page document on interface description standards. Maybe not 30, but it's more than 10. I know that. Over the years, I was just a huge proponent. And I think, and I hope that some of you on the call that I know we worked together agreed that, we kept finding additional tags over the years that we had to keep putting on. And I don't know, I just feel that, like, to me, whatever the device is, I want it to be as descriptive as possible without being too overwhelming. So I like all those tags in there. I like to know that I like to know the optic vendor in the interface, to be honest with you. I know that's too much sometimes because those change quickly, but that's to me where that's where I think, a tag that is a meta tag that then dips somewhere else is for those type of information. But, your location of where your what's the interface on the other side of the other device, et cetera, the speed. Because, if you upgrade that interface, you just change the description, right? You need to have that discipline on your metadata. And I agree with that. Now, where I was going was I've seen several, and I was kind of shocked that where they just want to use an arbitrary field in the interface description and then have that look I just think you're introducing another point of where it's going to break, right? Where there's going to be some data misalignment. And I don't know, I know people have heard me say this before, and I've used it for years, and people think it's corny, and I don't care, but I don't keep a database of what's in my refrigerator. I go look at what's in my refrigerator, and I know that's not quite the same. I know it's a little, but the idea being is that I don't want to maintain something somewhere else that can also lead to, bad information, et cetera. And back to your your movie example there, we've all come across a movie that we were like, this is an action or this was a comedy. You're like, who tagged that? So again, it goes back to who is controlling all that? Do you have standards for that? So that's why, again, I knew we were, like we talked about it, you and I spent the most time on this subject because we just went through all the things that we've seen. And yeah, I'd love to hear from some other folks on, if they've seen that trend or if you're moving to that trend, and why? Because I really want to learn if that's just something that is just because folks don't have the pain experience yet. And so they're thinking that's a way to do it. I don't know. So I'm curious, anybody.
Sorry. So what was the question, Mike? You're asking if
I'm asking if you got, if any, sorry.
face description, if people are happy with it being somewhat arbitrary or having lots of arbitrary free-form fields in it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So what I've seen with two ISPs now was, giving the device a name, of course, but then the interfaces just had numbers and letters and whatever, like circuit IDs. And then that circuit ID, you went to another system.
Yeah. So it sets you up to swivel chair, right?
Yes. And that's, but then they were like, well, we only have to maintain it in one place, which is over here. So, I mean, I guess I'm trying to understand the argument, but I'd love to hear from others. And my question was, I just feel like that's just backwards. I mean, I just feel like, if you're not, I mean, especially being, a lot of us sitting there on routers, I mean, I just like to know what I'm connecting. And I think most engineers, before they go and dip that meta tag you don't know what it is, they're going to run some commands on the routers, so show ISS neighbors, et cetera, or device. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm a huge proponent and I've seen it and I'm curious if people, and I see what Guy says, which makes sense.
I think the best practice is probably to use a combination of both. I think you need structured fields, but there is nothing wrong at all with having an identifier inside the interface description.
Oh, I totally agree.
You can cut and paste into another system and get even more detail, right? I don't see anything wrong with that at all. And there is a limit to how big an interface description can be. You can't put everything in the kitchen sink in there, which maybe that's fortunate, maybe it's not, but you can only overload so much data into it. Right? You can't it could be really confusing if you put your internal circuit ID plus the carrier circuit ID plus the cross connect circuit ID plus the phone number of the NOC to call for, the local data center or you don't want to put all that stuff in there. That's
lat longs, which I've seen, and it's like, what? So yeah, I mean,
no. Interesting.
Yeah. I was like, okay, I mean, that's not an interface because it's about interfaces, but it's also just other metadata on a device, right? It could be any metadata on any, it could be a BGP configuration, right? Not a interface description per se, but it comes back to, you got to have standards. You have to have standards. They have to be applied. They have to be consistent, for all of this for you to get the results of whatever project you want, right? That's where you need to be. Now, however you get there, that's why I was trying to ask the question, do folks find it that it's getting, that it's easier just to make a real basic description? Because again, where I come from is like, where I came from and my background is like saying, hey, I want to have as much information in there as that a human can have immediately. But you're right? It gets to a point where, at some point okay, I got a circuit ID. I don't have all the information. I go over to, another system and pull up the circuit ID, but yeah, I do think it's a combination of both. That's my opinion. And I've seen people moving just to an arbitrary number that then links to something else. And I just wonder if that's a growing trend out there or if that's something that,
I definitely see that with one of NetMaven's customers. I'm not going to name and shame, but they have an interface description that basically has only a internal circuit ID that they have to cut and paste that into Metasolv to get any kind of information about that. Actually, that comprises a large number of their interfaces, but not completely. They have, for other types of interfaces, they do slap like a prefix on it so that at least they can get some interface classification in Kentic. So they know this is a peer, this is a backbone circuit, this is a transit provider, and they can get some real basic classification out of that. But, That's another reason to have good interface descriptions. It's not just for AI ops; it can be for
Right. Yeah.
all kinds of tools. I mean, for Kentic, it's absolutely critical that you have a good interface description. Otherwise, you can't build any good reports that show you where you can track, like, traffic going to customers. Where's it coming from? Is it coming from transit or peering or public peering?
Yeah.
And if it's coming from one of those, then which transit provider and which peer and all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Lack of an interface description will stop a Kentic deployment in its tracks.
Yeah. No, I've seen the same thing. That's why I mentioned it. Not a NetMaven's customer, but I saw, again, I won't name names either. Nobody on this call, and the same thing. And I asked the question, and again, I was working with them on a daily basis, so I saw the engineers, saying, "Oh, I have to go do this anyways," so they were struggling with, and it was really what I saw was that their problems were that it didn't matter what they used as the interface description. They had a compliance issue, right? They weren't making sure that the data was, in compliance, so what they were seeing a lot was the same number, let's say for an interface description, appeared on 2 or 3 different routers. And it's like, how can that happen? I know how it can happen, but that's what I'm saying is like, that's where they were seeing the struggle. That's what we're trying to point out. It doesn't matter what you call it. You got to make sure you have a strategy and a plan. And I like Guy's comment, that, it's basically, you got to have some moderate, I think you have to have some moderate description, with, like you said, a link to something else for more data, of course, nowadays, because there's just so much, but it can't be so little that it, and again, I just don't agree with I personally don't think that approach works very well, but that's just my opinion. So I like moderately descriptive as well, like Greg and Guy are saying.
Middle ground, something you can look at.
Yep.
You can, like, a person can look at it and parse some valuable information out of it, but it's also got to be machine parsable so that it can support a tagging of metadata as it comes in, so that it can support classification in systems like Kentic. It's got to be structured enough to do some of those basic things. Here's another question. So, I don't know if this is a controversial or not. I think the common wisdom is that your CMDB should be your single source of truth that drives the creation of your interface descriptions, that you should always go back and reference the CMDB, or you should have some other system that's a single source of truth. But the reality is a lot of networks are still relying on the network as the single source of truth. So what actually is your preference? I want to see if anybody thinks that the network should be the single source of truth. It should be the most reliable place to get information about an interface. Put a 1 in chat if that's your opinion.
So I'll start, since I can have a mic real quick.
Yeah, while we're waiting for the answers to come in.
Yeah, while we're waiting for the answers. I mean, I would clarify that, Dave, and I'd say I don't agree with that if you're manually putting that data into CMDB. Only if you're getting that data directly from the network into CMDB, because I've seen that, right? There people are entering the information into a CMDB, not taking it from the networks. I would agree, but if that CMDB is not, if you're not pulling that in, if it's a configuration database that you're dumping it in there some other way, like you're not, pulling it in, because I've seen that, then I would say no. But yes, if it's automatic, I would agree. That is the network, right? I mean, if you're pulling it, you have a look on your face.
Oh, that's me, because I'm looking at chat without using my reading glasses.
Okay.
Sorry. I was reading a couple of the comments there. Like Chris is saying, there's no single source of truth in any network. But no, I agree, Mike. If you are doing both independently, like if you're depending on a person to keep the interface description in sync with the CMDB, you're in for a world of hurt. Because I'll tell you what's going to happen in that environment. The CMDB is going to drift so far off of reality that you may as well just destroy the VM and forget about it completely. It's going to get so bad. But no, I mean, I do know, again, not naming names, but do know of a NetMaven's client who takes the interface descriptions from the network and overwrites them in the CMDB on a regular basis to ensure that they're in sync.
Right.
Now,
Sweet.
I don't think that they want to do that long term. I think the strategy is to have enough metadata in the different parts of the CMDB to be able to create the interface description, populate it into the interface description in the CMDB, and then have the network synchronize from that. But that is, that's a little more work.
Yeah.
It's going to take a little bit longer to get there.
Yeah. I was reading Chris's comment as well. So I was just, and guys, so I'm doing the same thing now. I was looking at it.
Just looking through the chat here. Some
depending
really
on
good
how far
comments.
away I'm from the screen, I have to do this.
Chris says, best case, you have a CMDB of some sort that is the source of intent and configs are pushed on that data, but the network is the source of state, which should be pulled into some kind of time series database to record state over time. That is a great idea too. I know a lot of people that that information where that config information is stored in like an influx DB, so you can see how that changes over time. Definitely, I mean, there's a change log in NetBox and Autobot, but that's not a particularly great way to get a sense for how things have changed over time on an interface.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I guess, I mean, I know there's a couple of guys on the call here that had experienced this. I remember back in the level 3 days, maybe it was late Global Crossing days, but, I know that, there was a time where they were trying to push out customer configs to the network, from the CPE, what a CPE was connected to an edge device, right? For example, and Greg and Guy or somebody might remember all the details, but I remember we had this discussion around, understanding like, hey, I'm going to push this information from this database, right, up to the device, right, and update the customer interface description based on what somebody put in the database. And that's why, and I remember having this discussion around, well, the single source of truth on that should be just because your database says that customer has a 1 gig interface, I don't care what your database says. What is on the router, right? The router has a 10 gig interface. Okay. So, and we saw that many times. That's why it was like, you need to take what does the router say, right? So then to Chris's point, don't go manually push that description for your customer. Pull in what you have from there on a, state basis, 24 hours, maybe probably not for customers, right? To get the interface description, you could probably do every whatever, but you pull it in and then that's what you do. And I remember having that huge debate about, well, it's over here. It's right. It's what was configured. And it's like, yeah, but that's not the source of truth of, for things like what is the customer's interface speed, things like that. And so I agree with Chris, absolutely, that there is no quote single source, but I do think that, having that combination of a CMDB and taking information, you have to take the information from the devices. Some information has to be the single source of truth. What speed of interface does an interface have? Is the router, no database is going to tell you that unless they got it from the router. That's just what I was trying to say, is that those things are examples of what I've seen in the past, right? People trying to push the database to the network and then make the database the single source of truth. So I think it's a combination.
Yeah, certainly a lot of people are nervous about having the network get overridden from the configs. And I don't think that Greg is clearly past that point with his network, since they are, I'd love to figure out how many automations you think you'll do on your network this year, Greg. But last year you hit about the 2 million workflow mark, which is just absolutely amazing to me that a network is gotten that prolific with making automated changes in the network. It's to be celebrated for sure, but that's something everybody has to get over. On pace for 3 million this year. Awesome, Greg. Awesome. Well, let's move on. I tried to block out an hour and a half on everyone's calendar for this today, but appreciate that when you signed up, you may have only been expecting to spend about an hour or so. I don't want to run too much over the hour if we don't have to here. Let's hit the next topic. Executive sponsorship is so important for success. If you if you are not an executive yourself, but you want to deploy AI ops, you've got to find yourself one of these. The project has no chance of success without having someone fairly senior in your company who's willing to stand up and say, this is important for our company. And, it's going to take a little bit of time to figure out who that is sometimes. Sometimes it's an engineering leader. Sometimes it's an operations leader. But what you're looking for when you try to identify an executive sponsor is someone who's well respected and someone who is articulate, but someone who also could be considered a visionary, someone who can paint a picture of the future, what the future could look like after a technology like this is fully deployed. And if you don't have that, then your chances of success with your AI ops project are pretty low, I think. So once you have figured out who that person is, so you have to get them on board. And that person's going to want to know, what do you want from me? What do you expect? Do you expect me to, how much time of mine is this going to take? Is it going to take me 10 hours a week? Do I have to run around and get everybody on board and secure the funds and, do the business case? Or, are you doing that? And then we touch base and we review it. And then you pull me into meetings where you think you need my help, right? Having a good understanding of helping that person understand what it is you think you need from them in order to be successful is a great way to start that relationship and kick it off. And if they don't feel like they have time or they aren't passionate enough about the project, that's something you're going to want to pick up on and maybe change your who if the conversation about the what doesn't go too well. And the how is pretty much the same thing. Like, how involved do they want to be? Do they want to be involved in the vendor selection? Do they want to be involved in, ongoing vendor reviews? Do they want to be involved in the road mapping, or do they really just want to be involved in like a quarterly executive sync up meeting where they get a readout and report on success? So those are all super important things from my perspective for that executive sponsorship. Mike, you have any examples off of the top of your head where this has gone well or hasn't gone well that you can think of?
Yeah, I know you and I know of a few. I mean, I know one where, and it was a trickle down effect, right? Where, you know, and I think, the implementation of a software for AI ops, was looked at by this company as everybody's talking about it, we got to do it, right? Kind of thing, without what we've been talking about, the proper business case and planning. And then you have an executive sponsor who's just, who was doing it for, oh, we're going to do AI ops, right? And so when there was no clear, and then we go back to like that we're going to have it next, right? If there's no clear plan of what you're trying to do, right, with an executive sponsor who understands what the return of this what the return on investment is for this plan, it's going to fail. And that's what I saw, right? Is that if you have a strategy and you implement the strategy, the companies that have done that have been successful. And the one that I'm thinking of that wasn't successful was because they didn't have the right executive sponsorship. And what that ended up leading to as well is that then, because they didn't have that, even though they had the funding, they didn't have the support, and therefore the user base also didn't adopt the platform and thought it was just a flash in the pan and thing. So it failed, right? And in contrast, the ones who actually plan and say, I need a platform, and I want to introduce AI ops to provide me X, Y, or Z, right? I want to do this and solve this problem for our organization. And then, again, no scope creep. You come and you execute on that plan, and you have an executive sponsor who says, okay, see, I did that. I've got the return on investment. Now we're going to do this. Now we're going to do that. You need that executive sponsor. I will say real quickly, the last thing I'd say is I've seen the opposite also, where I had one ISP that I was working with where the executive sponsor was the one who implemented it, who actually went in and got the program, brought it in, got it installed, and did all that, but held on to it like this. And therefore, you know, most of the folks around them didn't get involved. And that's another side of the coin, if you will, is you need to make sure that you have an executive sponsor, and you kind of mentioned it already, but you also need to make sure that you have whoever that is that they're also making sure they're involving others and they're not, this isn't their pet project, because this one company, that's how it got viewed, that, hey, that was a little pet thing they're doing and it cost this much money and we're done. We're not doing that anymore because, and obviously it was definitely needed, but, it was a case where really that company needed to do a lot of the things that we talked about, like maybe get a Kafka, maybe get their interface descriptions cleaned up or put some on there. And again, it was no one on this call. Do that first before you try to go and bring in that. So bring in an AIOps solution to try to solve a problem. So that's the other side of the coin, I would say.
Yeah, John was just pointing out that it's always good to have the executive sponsor at your kickoff meeting, and make sure they don't just lurk, but they actually have a speaking role in the kickoff meeting. All right, so if that's like an executive vice president, and you have, say, 20 people involved in the project, that having an executive vice president talk about why he feels it's important to the company and its evolution is huge. I know, Greg over at Lumen. I mean, he knows this for sure. Like they've been doing this automation thing for, I think, probably must be coming up on 6 years now. But it started off with the leadership in the company, signing on and saying, yeah, this is something we're willing to sponsor. And we do feel it's important for the success.
And
I can't tell you how many times I have seen, and this is not just AI ops or automation. It's any tool. This applies to any tool, whether you're talking about a element management system or an NMS platform or a metric system or a security system. People don't want to change. People want to keep doing things the way that they've doing them. That there's rarely a case where everyone is just on board with completely changing the way they work and having to learn something new because it's uncomfortable and they may not think that it's worth the time because they perceive that the value of the new system is going to be about the same as the value in the old system or any number of things. And so it's super easy for, like a sponsor to come in who isn't sufficiently senior in the organization. They're like a senior manager, maybe a director level in a particular organization, and they sponsor this tool and they have the money to deploy it, and they go ahead and they get it deployed, but it pretty much stops at that point because the other people that could be getting value from it, they weren't involved in the decision-making process. They have no skin in the game as far as adopting this tool. And if you cannot get people to adopt a tool, it will die. And it's only a matter of time before the renewal of that software gets canceled because an unadopted tool is a dying tool. It's not going to have the longevity. So
and if I
that
could
kind of
add,
takes us into our next topic here.
hey, real quick on that point, Dave, sorry to interrupt you. Could I just dovetail onto that last point there? I saw firsthand, I personally believe that we've always had that, we've seen that, right? Where whether it was you're introducing a new ticketing system or whatever the software was, right? Or if it was a new router, everybody, right, is resistant to that. That's normal human. I personally believe AI ops is like 10x on steroid, right? Because I see a lot of the frontline employees, having worked with them over the past year, trying to deploy AI ops, more concerned than they've ever been in my 25 plus years of working with engineers, on the front line, worried that they were going to lose their job in telecom over the years. And I think that's an even bigger barrier now that you have, and I've seen it done well. Greg's done it well. His organization's bought into this. I've seen it, I've worked with them, but I've seen where you don't. And again, and I think that's a big thing around the user adoption. It's even more difficult battle here, I think, because everybody sees it on the media in their daily lives about AI replacing things, right? So I think it's even heightened more than it has ever been, especially in the networking space.
No, that's right. When it comes to AIOps, I think AI is so overhyped right now that you get a wide range of reactions, anything from fear to complete skepticism. And people don't want to jump in and try it. Maybe they've tried Chat GPT once or twice and were unimpressed, or some other tool. And certainly there are probably thousands of tools that have been built that are advertised as being fit for a particular purpose, that maybe they just use Anthropic or OpenAI on the back end APIs to do their thing. And the results are pretty unimpressive. So, people that have experimented are a little skeptical.
Yeah.
So that certainly can be an additional barrier to adoption for your standard run-of-the-mill tool that you have to overcome. And I think the only way to push through that is education.
Yeah. Agreed.
Let's talk about the last piece, business planning, something that is near and dear to my heart, given how long I was in product management at a large company, which is this. First, we'll just hit through a few of these concepts here. So pretty much every company that is even moderately mature has something called a business case or something similar to that. If you have a CFO and a finance team, they probably have a template that they want you to put your project into. They want to see a 5-year projection of revenue, of costs, and all those kinds of things, and it spits out finance metrics like NPV and IRR and those kinds of things. And what I've seen a great deal of in my years is that the business case is like this. It's this box that you have to check to get your money, and so people just push through it as quickly as possible to get these numbers up there, and run it by the finance team. And finance team might not even know that much about your business or what you do, so they might be pretty happy to just sign off on it as soon as the numbers look good. And then, they may do a little bit of due diligence and question some of your assumptions, but, really they're just trying to get through it as quickly as possible too, and make sure that whatever's in here is going to pass the sniff test with the CFO and the other people that approve the funds. And if this is how you approach your creating and finishing your business case, this is my belief, you're missing a big opportunity, because this business case or this BDR or this business plan that your finance team wants you to create and present is a great opportunity to go and talk to other stakeholders in the company and start to talk to them about the project and how it can positively impact your company. So, for example, maybe you start off with some assumptions around how it will reduce mean time to repair. Well, this is a great time for you to sit down with the people that do the repair work and talk about, under what circumstances will this reduce the time it takes to repair a particular kind of outage? What kind of outages would it be able to speed up the resolution on? And, what does that imply then in terms of the data that needs to be in the system to do that? And once you start to have those conversations, you actually start to build out requirements that can be incredibly useful for the RFP. Like the things that you as an engineer assume are the most useful are not necessarily what's most useful to the NOC. And so it's an opportunity to test ideas and get feedback on that, and to validate some of the variables that you might have in there that are kind of assumed or implied in terms of the cost benefit analysis that gets output in that. And the biggest win that comes out of this business planning process isn't even the business plan, although that is useful. It is actually the process of talking to your peers and counterparts inside the organization and getting them as supporters, because without their support, there won't be any adoption, right? Imagine you roll the tool out and 6 months later you go back to a leader and you say, it doesn't seem like anyone from your team is logging in. What can we do with this? That is a completely different conversation than, hey, you and I talked about how this would benefit your team and how they work before we signed the company up to spend money. I am not seeing your team log in and use the tool. What did we get wrong in our assumptions? And that second conversation may not even be necessary if they were involved in the business planning process up front and then incorporated into the project and its rollout. So those are my thoughts on the business planning process. Don't know if anyone agrees. I'll put anything in chat if you've seen the same kind of, we'll say, misbehavior or dysfunction in your own company, or if you agree, let us know in the chat. Mike, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I totally agree. And you mentioned it, right? What you get out of that is really a plan, not just getting the approval for buying whatever you're going to buy, but you also, like you said, you're walking through a plan, and that helps. And that's what I was saying. Where I've seen it go bad is, oh, we got to go do AIOps, and there was no business case. It was just, yes, we want to go spend $50,000 and do AIOps, right? And then you go buy it. You didn't have any plan. What happens? They don't use it anymore, right? And that's the one example I've used several times here now. And it was because of exactly what you said. Hey, they're not logging in, but then people were like, logging into what? They didn't know, So it was that one was like the prototypical how not to do it, because there was no. It was just go get it because AIOps is hot and everybody's doing AIOps, so we got to buy it. So I agree 100%.
Yeah, got to talk through that. But just in closing, NetMavens is about helping people get this and other kinds of work done. So if you enjoyed what you've heard here, and Mike and I gave you any kind of confidence about our ability to help execute on these kinds of projects, whether it's helping you create and implement a better interface description standard, or working on data architectures, or anything, if you or somebody that in the industry could use some help, please have them get in touch.
Thank you all.
Thanks a lot, everybody, for coming.
Thanks, Dave.